We're now in John's Gospel, chapter 18, where Jesus appears before Pontius Pilate. Here, verse 28 to verse 40. Then the Jews led Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. By now, it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, the Jews did not enter the palace. They wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" "If he were not a criminal," they replied, "we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." "But we have no right to execute anyone," the Jews objected. This happened so that the words Jesus had spoken, indicating the kind of death that he was going to die, would be fulfilled. Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Is that your own idea?" Jesus asked. "Or did others talk to you about me?" "Do you think I'm a Jew?" Pilate replied. "It was your people and your chief priests who handed you over to me. What is it that you've done?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jews. But now my kingdom is from another place." "Ah, you are a king then," said Pilate. And Jesus answered, "You are right in saying I am a king. In fact, for this reason I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." "What is truth?" Pilate asked. And with this he went out again to the Jews and said, "I find no basis for a charge against him, but it is your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at the time of the Passover. Do you want me to release the King of the Jews?" And they shouted back, "No, not him. Give us Barabbas." And now Barabbas was taken in part of the rebellion. So here we have one of the crucial points of history. Here we have Jesus standing before the infamous Pontius Pilate, the man who has gone down in history as the one who was weak and ineffectual because he did not do the thing which he himself felt he ought to do. And we can see what he felt he ought to do as we rehearse this story. In fact, it's very clear as we read through that account that Pilate was astonishingly of a mind to try his very best to release Jesus from this charge and to set him free. But although he tried on numerous occasions to do that, he was ineffectual and powerless in the face of the crowd. And he was forced in the end to hand Jesus over to crucifixion, despite his very evident and huge misgivings. Let's take it from the top. Then the Jews led Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. Now that's not terribly far, it seems to me. If I remember correctly, it's from one side on the Temple Mount to another side, to the other end. And it's here that the Roman governor Pontius Pilate was situated. And they were sent to him simply because only the Roman authorities had the power of execution. And it was quite clear what the Jews wanted here. The Jews wanted Jesus to die. Caiaphas had said so himself. It is more expedient that one man should die than for the whole nation to perish. He put it in those prophetic terms. But for Caiaphas, what he meant, of course, was that this person, Jesus, will so foment a rebellion and have such a huge following that undoubtedly it will cause an uprising if we allow him to go on, and that uprising will bring the wrath of the legions of Rome down upon us, and then we will be scattered. And that's what they feared most of all. A real and genuine fear as it happened, because in AD 70, that's precisely what took place. But they led him to the Roman governor, because only the governor could execute Jesus, and they wanted him out of the way because of the danger which he posed to them. It was now early morning. Now, by early morning, that means as the first light of day has dawned. That means we are here at around about something like 6 o'clock in the morning. So all of the events which have taken place so far, coming to the high priest in the middle of the night, those kind of trials, that must have taken place somewhere around 3 o'clock in the morning. A late time, which is no wonder that we have in other Gospels Jesus admonishing the disciples in the Garden of Gethsemane for falling asleep. It was a very, very late time. So by this time, they had the dawn was coming up. We know the dawn was coming up already because of what we see of Peter. Peter was denying Jesus Christ outside before the cock crew. And it said that the cock crew crowed, and as the cock crowed, that of course signifies dawn, because that's when cocks crow. So that's just the timing of all of this. The sun was rising on Good Friday morning, and it was essential, therefore, that they maintained their distance here because of the Sabbath. Because of the coming Sabbath and the Passover. To avoid ceremonial uncleanness, the Jews did not enter the palace, because it was the palace of a Gentile, and that would have meant that they would become ritually unclean themselves, and they would not be able to take part in the Passover. So they kept outside, and that meant that Pilate had to keep coming to and fro. He came from his courtyard, where his palace was, and brought Jesus backwards and forwards, or came back to the people, spoke to them, went back inside, went back to the people, went back inside, in this kind of to and froing fashion. Now, the interesting thing here is that Pilate is alerted to this case at this time, dawn. Now, in the normal course of events, Pilate would not be up at that hour. It's unlikely that at the crack of dawn, that's the time when the Roman governor gets up. It couldn't be expected that that was the norm. Most people didn't get up at the crack of dawn. So, for him to be available at that time, there must have been a pre-arranged agreement between the Jews and Pilate. In fact, one can speculate here, as indeed Frank Morrison speculates in the book Who Moved the Stone, that in order for Judas to be given the clearance to go and get Jesus and bring him for trial at that point, the Jews had to be sure that Pilate could be brought into play, and that Pilate would convict him, and that he would be put to death. Because without that assurance, there is no point in triggering all of these events at this time. So, Frank Morrison suggests, and I think quite rightly too, that as soon as Judas arrives, there is clearly a scrambling to see if we can get all of this done before the events of the Sabbath occur. Can we get Jesus killed, crucified, dead, and buried before the Sabbath actually starts? That's the question. Only if we can get Pilate on board. So the implication here is that in the middle of the night, somebody has to go and see Pilate and persuade him to take on this case as of first importance and agency. And the idea then is that the only person who would be credible enough to do that, to wake up Pilate at that hour on such urgency, could only have been Caiaphas. Now, admit all of this is speculation, but it seems to hang together rather well. So you have Judas coming to Caiaphas saying Jesus is ready to give himself up. Caiaphas saying, can we get all this done in time? Big debate amongst the Sanhedrin, raising people up, getting them out of bed, trying to see if we can sort this out. Going to Pilate, and so we need him involved. Can we get him on board? Going to see him, getting his agreement that yes, he would try this rabble-rouser, and yes, he would convict him. And so, with that expectation in mind, they bring Jesus at dawn to see Pilate, expecting a swift condemnation. But what do they get? They get nothing of the sort. They get prevarication from Pilate, and the agreement of the previous night, or the supposed agreement of the previous night, is torn up and thrown away. Why did Pilate change his mind? Is there any indication for that? Yes, there is. Because in another gospel it says that just as Pilate is going out to meet Jesus, Claudia wakes up, having had a terrible dream about Jesus. It's probably quite clear that maybe Pilate and Claudia had a discussion about him, if Caiaphas came to see Pilate in the middle of the night, woke him up, probably woke up Claudia too, his wife, and when he came back to bed, they said that they want to execute Jesus, which I'll be seeing him tomorrow, and clarify that. He tells Claudia those kind of details. And then she goes back to sleep, has this dream about Jesus, which she sends quickly an urgent note to Pilate, have nothing to do with this man. Do not condemn him, in other words, because I've suffered much in a terrible dream because of him. Pilate is put on notice that this is not a usual situation. Pilate wants to pay attention to what Claudia says and takes note of dreams. So, when the Jews come to Pilate and say, as they say here, Pilate comes out to them and say, what charges are you bringing against this man? They expected a simple, straightforward, automatic conviction. And they're stunned at Pilate's obfuscation, stunned at the idea that Pilate has not just accepted that, okay, we see who he is, let's convict him. On the contrary, he wants a full trial, he wants evidence, he wants details, he wants witnesses, he wants the full thing, which is not what they agreed the previous night, as Frank Morrison suggests. So that explains then the Jews' response. If this man were not a criminal, they replied, we would not have handed him over to you. That's a rebuke to Pilate. A rebuke which comes from the idea is, haven't we got an agreement on this? Haven't we already understood that you will condemn this guy and then we can execute him and go on with our lives? How come you're questioning the whole process now? If he were not a criminal, we wouldn't have brought him to you. Come on. Pilate said, in his typical way, the first time he dodges this issue, take him yourselves and judge him by your own law. I won't have anything to do with it. I don't want to condemn Jesus. That's the first occasion where he tries to get out of judging Jesus. They won't have it. Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law, but we have no right to execute anyone, the Jews objected, thereby giving away the whole idea that execution is exactly what they have in mind. Better that one man die than that the whole nation suffer. We must have this man dead, and they were bent upon it. We have no right to execute anyone. That's why we brought him to you. Don't you remember? This happened so that the words Jesus had spoken, indicating the kind of death he was going to die, would be fulfilled. I suspect that this is to reference to being lifted up. When the Son of Man is lifted up, as John has mentioned earlier, he will draw all men to himself. And quite literally, the death that was given was not a sword thrust or a beheading or some other stoning. Being lifted up requires a public display. And the only method of execution that produced a public display in those days was crucifixion, where they put somebody on a cross and pushed them high up into the air so that everyone could see their death and execution and humiliation. So Jesus indicated the kind of death that he would die, and it's so to be fulfilled. That's why the Jews had to take him to Pilate to get an official and proper public execution. Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" We've got some dialogue missing here at this point, because in other Gospels you hear that they then try to produce their witnesses, and they produce witnesses which say, this is a man who claimed to be the king of the Jews. So those witnesses had to be hurriedly got together to claim that Jesus was a significant threat to the Roman governor. Anyone who claims himself to be king of the Jews is someone who's usurping Nero, or whoever it was who was on the throne at that time. So you have a situation then here at this point where rebellion and treason and traitorhood are being given to Pilate as the reason for executing Jesus, claiming to usurp the role of the Roman emperor, king of the Jews. Are you the king of the Jews? Well, Pilate didn't get that from Jesus himself or by questioning Jesus. He's got that from somewhere else, from the Roman authorities. And Jesus quite rightly points this out. Is this your own idea? Are you accusing me of something, or are you trying to find out the facts of the matter? In other words, have you come with a preconception given to you by somebody else, or is this meant to be a fair trial? The dilemma here that Jesus is placing Pilate in is that have you come to ascertain what the facts are, to question me, to interview me, to find out what the situation is? Or have you come with your mind made up already, made up by the Jewish authorities? That's the implication here. Is that your own idea, or do you talk to others about me? And Pilate says, do you think I'm a Jew? I don't care about these other people, and I'm not someone who wishes to condemn you as the rest of the Jews do. And I'm not concerned whether you're the king of the Jews in that kind of way. So, did others talk to me about me? The others being the Jews, and yet those Jews, you've taken on the Jews' opinion, is what Jesus is saying, therefore. You have taken on the ideas, the thoughts, the accusations of the Jews who brought me to you. You're acting on their behalf. You're acting as their puppet. You're acting as though they are controlling you. You're acting on behalf of the Jews. Hence Pilate's rebuff here. Do you think I'm a Jew? Pilate replied, it was your people and your chief priests who handed you over to me. What is it that you have done? Now, this is the question which I think Jesus was expecting to begin with. The interview of the accused. Let's see what the evidence is, and let's see what you have to say for yourself. And in answer to the question of what have you done, Jesus accepts the idea that he is a king. He's accused of being the king of the Jews, and he does not refute it. He does not object to it. He does not say, I am not the king of the Jews. On the contrary, he accepts the fact that he is king of the Jews, and he makes that very clear to Pilate. Yes, I am the king of the Jews, and my kingdom is not of this world, which means you don't have to worry about me from a political point of view. The kingdom I'm claiming is no threat to the Roman Empire. It's no alternative or confrontation between the two. Earlier on, Jesus has said, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, the physical, material things of the world, and render to God the things which are God's. And Pilate, for all of his obstinacy and foolishness and weakness, I think he has some understanding of that from Jesus, that his kingdom is not of this world, that he is not speaking in physical, rebellious terms. He's not one of these rebellious people like Barabbas who took part in a rebellion. He has nothing to do with that. My kingdom's got nothing to do with that. And Pilate understood that. If it were, then my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jews. But that hasn't happened. Well, Peter struck out with a sword, but Jesus reproved him for that. That was his impetuosity. But my kingdom is from another place, but I'm not rebellious in the same way that Barabbas was rebellious. There's the true rebel, the political rebel, the one who sets up a rebellion and kind of guerrilla tactics against the Roman oppressive forces. Jesus teaches nothing of the kind. Well, you are a king then, said Pilate, in consequence understanding the implication that you have a kingdom. Jesus answered, you are right in saying that I am king. He owns the title of king, being both prophet, priest and king, all three. In fact, for this reason I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of the truth listens to me. And here automatically he raises the game now from a mere political intrigue, a mere rebellious act of a Barabbas. He raises this to the level which is way above the understanding even of Pontius Pilate. For this reason I was born. Which reason is that? The reason of being a king? The reason of being a sacrifice? The reason of being here before you, Pilate, sacrificing a life for the sake of the many? For this reason I was born, and for this I came into the world, and to testify to the truth. We have echoes here of John chapter 1, where Jesus has been described by John as the light came into the world, the light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not understood it. He was in the world, though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. And here is that point, that crux in history when that recognition either takes place or it does not. And it does not. Here at that point, I came into the world to testify to the truth, and everyone on the side of truth listens to me. My kingdom is about the truth. It's not about political power. Of course, the truth is powerful once you understand it because it's life-changing and life-altering. But it's not a political power in that sense. It's a power which affects human hearts and human lives. And if you recognize the truth, then you recognize me, says Jesus, because I embody that truth. What is truth? Says Pilate. And he went out from there. So, what is truth? Says Pilate. And you know, there's a touch of cynicism in that phrase. I think there's an idea of a jadedness in there, like no one knows what the truth is. You know, probably the fact that he's been someone who adjudicates. He is the guy who people bring cases to. He has to find out truth from falsehood, and probably been rather battle-wearied over many, many years in coming to the conclusion that who knows what the truth is. I would guess that Pilate didn't really know what the truth was, and probably even gives the impression he doesn't even believe in the existence of truth. There's just, if you don't believe in truth, there's just expediency. There's just the quick fix, the thing which will solve the problem of the moment. I'm not here looking for the truth. I'm here looking for the solution. And I don't care which way it leads me or whether you think it's right or wrong. If it's a solution, that's what I'm going to go for. So here, Pilate goes back out again, despite his cynicism and despite his pragmatism, and says, I find no basis for a charge against him. Clearly been impressed by the person of Jesus, and clearly been warned by Claudia against condemning an innocent man. Here he finds this man to be innocent, and that the words he speaks make sense. There's no rabble-rouser here. There's no one claiming to bring Caesar down. There's no one who says, down with the Roman Empire. But rather there's someone here who is reasonable, sensible, honest, and who claims that his kingdom is of a different kind. Pilate, no doubt, is impressed and also afraid. He goes out, for the second, third time here, there is no case to answer. Again, trying to absolve himself from the guilt of this man's condemnation, for which he can never be free. Still, they do not wish to listen to his release of this Jesus. So he tries another time. A third time is, it's your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at a time of the Passover. Do you want me to release the King of the Jews? Hoping against hope that they're going to say yes. But no, the rabble-rousers have been paid for by the leaders of the Jews, and they're ready with their answer. No, not him. Give us Barabbas. Barabbas, the true enemy of the state, the true usurper of Romans' sovereignty and control over the nation, the true guerrilla warfare, the true rebel, the true revolutionary, the political man who would raise armies if he could against Caesar. He is the one that they asked to be released. Barabbas is the one who is ransomed, and the innocent is the one who is proclaimed guilty. The guilty innocent, and the innocent guilty. Such is the topsy-turvy world that Pilate has brought in upon himself, because Barabbas was guilty of rebellion. So here we have Pilate, keen to absolve himself of all guilt from this man Jesus because of his warning from Claudia, and being completely unable to do so. A weak man, a man without the real power and authority which he thought he ought to or should have had. A man who gives way to the crowd, a man who will forever have his name associated with weakness and political duplicity. The man who is forever associated with the expedient solution. The man who thinks that by washing his hands in public, he can wash his soul or heart from the stain of guilt which clings to him as the one who forever goes down in history as the man who condemns the innocent.